The year before we did a Hall of Fame introduction. We're not doing it this year. We decided to go to an every 2-year process. So a year from now, we will be inducting the class of 2024, roughly in the range of half a dozen folks. And we really are interested and hope you all will spread the word that we are open for nominations. I believe it starts in August to September. We'll publish all that on the website. And then invite nominations for people who deserve to be in the Southern Appalachian Paddlesports Hall of Fame. By the way, everybody who is in it now, would you please stand up? We got a bunch of them here. Mark, come on, Mark. Charlie, Robert, Will, whoever else is in there. All these guys over in the peanut gallery. Thanks, you guys. Glad you guys are here.
John Burton.
Yeah, I'm standing already. I am delighted to have two, three, four, depending on how you count, of the icons of the history of river rescue and safety in the world of whitewater paddling with us tonight. One of the true veterans of the instruction world and who has helped carry the ACA in the world of instruction is a fellow named Sam Folks, who's right here. And Sam has the, i.e. I've thrown him under the bus to introduce Slim and Charlie, who's going to give us our program tonight. So Sam, hurry up.
All right, thanks a lot, John. Welcome once again. I'm really excited about this tonight because it's a rare opportunity to get these two pioneers, these two icons together at the same time. They're going to tell similar stories, but a little bit of different stories. Charlie's going to be more the paddler side, and then Slim's going to talk about how he worked with the agencies and institutions in the government to get volunteer fire departments and that sort of thing trained. But it's Veterans Day today, so I want to give a salute out to the veterans. I know that Slim Ray here is a veteran of the Vietnam War. We have other veterans here too, but I want to give a salute to you. These guys are the authentics. When I talked to Charlie about coming down and doing this presentation, he goes, well, you can do it. I said, Charlie, no, I can't. I'm not an authentic pioneer like you are. I learned from you. You know, one of the most basic pieces of river rescue gear is a throw bag, right? Everybody's got a rope and a bag. Well, Charlie's the guy that popularized that, found that it was a great tool, and it's one of the most basic pieces of gear. And then he had a company back then that actually manufactures these throw bags. And I was thinking about this the other day, that, you know, when the common thread that we all have, you know, the museum is dedicated to the founders of Nantahala Outdoor Center, right? Payson and Aurelia. So the common thread that I have with Charlie and Slim is Charlie worked in the early 70s at Nantahala Outdoor Center as a guide. Later on, Slim came along. I came in 1976. And the program actually started because of an event that took place on Section 4 of the Chattooga when Rick Bernard drowned, being the safety kayaker on Section 4 of the Chattooga. It's kind of like you have a flat tire in your car and you go, well, you know, there's nothing to fix this. I don't have a jack. So we had to start developing that toolkit and really, you know, another language besides river terminology. We had rescue terminology, like you have a vertical pin, you have a foot entrapment, on and on, all the language that we use in that discipline field. The discipline field has come a long way over the last, you know, 40 years, really. When you watch the evening news and you see a flood event and you see the firefighters come in, they all look like they're properly geared up. You know, they're no longer showing up in turnout gear. They've got rescue PFDs, they've got dry suits, and plus they act like they know what they're doing because they've had training. And Slim is one of the guys that brought that into the mainstream, so it became more accepted, and they accepted the training and started looking to the whitewater experts for information. But I really think, you know, NOC, if you think about all the outfitters that were spurred by NOC, and all the instructors, the outfitters, and then the whole rescue community. And then the center is still a focus point for teaching rescue. There's a lot of fire departments that use the Nantahala and other groups that teach on the Nantahala. So get ready for a journey through history where we look at where we were and then where we are now. And these are the two guys that were the pioneers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Charlie. And this was the first river rescue book. It was written by Slim and Les Bechtel, 1981, after the Rick Bernard drowning. That's an original copy. In '86, Charlie did one of the things he does now and has continued to do it for a long time, is a river safety report. I think this was published in 1986.
There were a bunch of them.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, and actually he's got a book that'll be coming out that's based on these events. A little later, I think it was in the 90s, that Whitewater Rescue Manual came out. This was something that was written by Charlie Walbridge and Wayne Summacher. And then later on, Swiftwater Rescue for Professionals was done by Slim Ray. There's been multiple updates and upgrade editions on both of these books. So these are the books that I used for textbooks when I taught rescue for about 30 years. So take it away, Charlie.
Thanks very much, Sam. Let's see, we need to move this over just here. How many people here started paddling after the year 2000? After 1990? 1980? 1970? 1960? 1950? Payson didn't make it. But this is the way things looked in the 1960s. And these are, some of these are pictures right out of the AW Journal. And you notice something's missing? We were still learning how to deal with whitewater. And life jackets were controversial. And at the top, that's Walt Harvest, probably the best kayaker in the country. He pioneered a great many of the big California runs. On the left, that's Fritz Orr Sr., and on the right is Frank Bell of Frank Bell's Rapid. You know, top flight paddlers of the day, no safety gear.
Hey, come on, you have flotation in the end of the boat, right?
This is the high one. Yeah. But in the next 5 to 10 years, things change. How do they change? Because paddling clubs led the way to figure out safer ways to do things, like the Whitewater Handbook for Canoe and Kayak. That's what I learned from, and I found an AW Journal on a friend's table. I joined the AW probably 67 or 68, and you start picking up things. Now, of course, everything back then was homemade. I mean, people look at you and they say, "You made your own boat?" Well, you know, a lot of clubs, they had it down. You wanted to build a boat, you found somebody who knew how to do it, who was building it, you helped them. Then they helped you, and then you helped the next guy. And as far as gear went, there were a lot of, if you didn't want to sew your own paddle jacket, or, you know, there were a lot of people around who would, you know, small scale things, people would get your gear together. Oh shoot, I gotta remember it's this one. And of course the AW Safety Code, which started in 1959. Wow. And it was one of the first things that talked about life jackets, helmets, high water, strainers, dams. Appalachian Mountain Club in the early 60s was doing a canoe clinic on a little pond somewhere around Boston. Water was up. 2 people went over the dam and died. And I mean, this was a club running things. But what I tell people is behind every single line in the AW safety code, there's a dead body or 2 or 3 or 4. We hopefully learn things from it. One of the things you see there are the AW river signals. I was a junior member of a committee in 1978, which included Walt Blackadar and O.K. Goodwin, and we had to agree on what the signals meant, because in the east, this meant stop. Out west, this meant go, and so we had to agree what the river signals were. And of course, O.K. Goodwin was long-time safety chair, 1970 to 1987. He was an active paddler, Boy Scout leader, racer, boat designer. Actually, he designed big boats as well as canoes. He worked for the Newport News shipyard, and he also competed with his wife Glenna in C2, paddled C1, and his daughter was on the U.S. whitewater team, and he was the spokesman for safety during that period. And he was the first person to really write about conflicts between paddlers and the rest of society, particularly river managers. And then in the 1970s, there was a big growth spurt. And 2 things made it happen. One of them was Jamie McEwen's miraculous performance in getting the gold medal at the '72 Olympics. And the other was Deliverance. Now, I don't think of Deliverance as something that would make me want to go paddling, but you know, when I think of it, you know, I was a kid and I watched these Westerns, and, you know, I didn't get to run around chasing banditos, but the idea of going out and camping and hiking around in beautiful country, that appealed to me. And also, there were a lot of people who are my age, who are just getting to be old enough to go out on their own, and they wanted some excitement. And paddling definitely filled the bill. This is the 1970s, and you can see now everybody's got life jackets and helmets. This guy here is Fearless Fred Young. Fred had a gear company in Chicago and a private plane. He said Chicago was perfectly located between the Southeast, West Virginia, and Colorado. And he boated a lot, probably swam more Class 5 than most people will ever see in their lives. But a lot of people started out paddling a canoe or raft and then moved up to homemade kayaks. And professional outfitting really grew. On the left, you're seeing the outfitting on the Cheat River, where I worked for a number of years. You can get some pretty big water on the Cheat. That is, when they started running the bigger levels, they got bigger rafts. They got that big black boat that they call a BFR, a big fat raft. And on the right, that's me guiding for Nantahala Outdoor Center on section 4. We had a good time. Payson ran a very tight ship. I really learned a lot from Payson. But things moved along like they don't now. I mean, when I ran down with a Section 4 trip in my C1, and I had a pretty good day. I only swam once at Sock'em Dog, and at the end of the day, Payson said, "Well, you had a pretty good day in your C1. How'd you like to guide a raft tomorrow?" And I found out, you know, some people, they didn't even get the demo in the C1. They just jumped right in and did it. But of course, the people who came to work at NOC tended to be pretty experienced. Nowadays, you have people who come out to train as guides who've never been paddling. So of course, things are different. And then of course, there was Donnie Dutton. How many of you guys remember Donnie? Oh yeah, I loved working with Donnie. He was a character. I could talk all night about Donnie Dutton stories, but I'll tell one. We were Donnie and I were driving up to unpin a boat that one of the rental customers had left at Del Bar's Rock. and we're driving up the gorge, and we see some guy throwing rocks at a rattlesnake. And Donnie says, "Pull over there." And I pulled over. He grabs a paddle out of the van, goes over to this guy, and he says, "Well, I ain't no way to kill a snake." Whap, whap, whap. Reaches down, grabs the snake behind the head, reaches in. He had a buck folding hunter on his belt. Reached out, holds it out to me, and says, "Open it." I open it up for him. He saws the head off, and it falls to the ground. He walks over to the guy's car. Poor Floridian didn't know what the hell was going on. Laid the snake out, dressed it, and he is saying, "I have wanted a snakeskin headband for nearly 3 years. This is the first one I've seen that's big enough." And so he takes the skin, he rolls it up on a stick, takes his hat off, puts it in the hat, puts the hat back on, and then he cuts up the pieces of snake meat. He throws the entrails on the ground, and he goes over to this guy with the snake meat on his handkerchief, and he says, "You want the meat? It's good eating now." And the guy goes, no. And so he ties the bandana up, takes his hat off, puts it in his hat, puts the hat back on, and we walk back to the van. And as we're about to drive off, this guy is sort of poking at this decapitated snake head on the ground. And Donnie leans out and yells at him, "Don't you touch that head! It'll bite you till sundown for certain." He had something to tell his friends. And of course, many great paddlers started at Smoky Mountain summer camps, like Van Damme, Murraywood, and High Rocks. I was amazed at how many people had gone through. People like Bunny Johns and John Burton. How many people started to paddle at one of these camps? There's still a few of them out there, and I understand that because the guy on the left is Marty Pecans. Marty and I started the Bucknell Outing Club in 1966, and we ran it for 4 years. I actually dropped out of school for a year because of bad health, and so I was able to turn it over to incoming freshmen. And the club kept going for a good while. I did my first Class 2 whitewater trip with Marty, Penns Creek in central Pennsylvania. And of course, this is a place where the whitewater industry started. High performance products, fiberglass boats, and down at the bottom, blue hole canoes. I was hoping Bob Lance would be here. He's one of my favorite people. I worked with him a bit when he was involved with ACA, but before, you didn't have to go out and either buy a Grumman or put something together. You could actually get something. Of course, the high performance kayaks were a bit fragile and expensive. I mean, why would you buy a fragile $299 boat when you can make a boat yourself for about $150? Well, he wasn't in business for long. And here's another thing that happened in the early 70s, Type 3 life jackets. And when I started paddling, there were no approved wearable life jackets at all. And paddlers would wear like Harashocks and Flothershocks, imported race jackets from Europe. But they weren't Coast Guard approved. But then Maurice Link, who ran Stearns Manufacturing, he'd been trying to get the Coast Guard to approve wearable jackets because the choice was either a horse collar or Mae West, and neither of those was particularly comfortable. And so he started making unapproved wearable life jackets, and Coast Guard realized that they'd lose control of the process, so they developed the Type 3 standard. And racing was at the center of whitewater sport back then. There were no kayak schools or clinics. The best way to learn was to go to races and watch other people and try to do the same things. And if you were lucky, some of the people, and I was lucky to get friendly with John Sweet, Norm Holcomb, and Tom Irwin from Penn State, those people will teach you stuff. I really love to race. And I thought, because we're here, These are from the 1974 Open Canoe Slalom Nationals, which were in blue holes, of course. And the top picture is me and Alan Kwan. The bottom picture is just me. I had hair back then, damn. And accident reporting actually started for me at a slalom race. The Icebreaker Slalom in Unadilla, New York was like the last race of the season, Class 2 race. And it drew a lot of people who'd been around the race circuit. It was just a wonderful social time for us to be out there. Well, I was heading down the course and I looked downstream and there are ropes in the river and people are moving around like this. And you know, people don't do that when there's nothing going wrong. But when there's something going wrong, you can tell because people start to get real jerky and jumpy. So I pulled in and I run down to the ledge. There was about a 2-foot ledge down there with about a maybe 2-foot wave. This guy underwater. Now what the hell's going on? I don't know what's going on here. And nobody knew what to do. There were guys who were very experienced yacht guides who I felt were the most experienced rescuers I knew. They didn't know what to do. A couple of them jumped in and tried to grab the guy as they went past, and that didn't work. A bunch of us jumped in the water and we're trying to divert the water. Well, as soon as we start diverting the water starts pushing us downstream, so we were done. And afterwards, I was pretty shook up. And I was talking to OK Goodwin, and he says, this is just a freak accident. Well, I wanted to understand it, and I talked to a lot of people, and what I heard was that this guy had been a C2 team. They flipped in the upper part of the course. His partner swam to shore, and he was digging his heels in and trying to pull the boat to shore. And he went over the ledge, and his foot went under a rock. And we had said, don't stand up in the river, you might sprain your ankle. Well, I wrote the accident report up, and it got into some canoe club journals, and by the time it got published in the AW Journal, I'd heard from a bunch of people saying, you know, there was something like this on the Obed. You know, there was something like this on the Nantahala. And so that was the beginning of the strong warning we give people. We want to learn from these things, and my whole goal in writing these accident reports is to get people talking about them. One of the editors of the AW Journal said, you know, I think this is kind of morbid. I read this stuff and I don't feel any better. And it's like, this is not an obituary. This is not a eulogy. This is an explanation of what happened so we can stay out of trouble. And after that, I got tapped by Chuck Tummins to be the ACA safety chair. They had such a thing back then, and we ended up doing some work with the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard had gotten this idea that what you needed to do was to have level flotation in open canoes, because that would make them stable and people could hang on. Well, it makes sense because they were powerboat people, and the way you solve powerboat problems is with boat design. But non-powered boats are different, and they had a study done that said that this was definitely the way to go. Well, we bugged them a lot, and it wasn't me as much as it was Chuck and OK Goodwin, but they finally let us come in and study the accidents ourselves. And we did not find any accidents where the level flotation would have helped. And it doesn't work very well because the boat's too narrow. You know, canoes like under 3 feet wide, where a motorboat is like over 6 feet and often more. So it wasn't working. But you see that unable to determine cause, 11%? Well, you're always going to get that with accidents because sometimes people take a canoe out, the boat flips, they find the boat, they go looking for the guy, or the guy turns up somewhere and a fisherman calls the cops. But the bottom line is we don't know exactly what happened. Well, the people who did the study said all of those would have benefited from level flotation.
What is level flotation? I'm sorry.
What's that?
What is level flotation?
What level flotation is putting, say about 3 inches of foam under the gunnels, 2-3 inches wide, about 6 inches long underneath the gunnels, so when the boat is swamped, it floats level. Well, it doesn't really, because it's too narrow. But that was their way of working at this, and we spent a lot of time working with Coast Guard, and fortunately, Ronald Reagan did one really good thing for us. He took away a lot of their money, because when we were socializing with the coasties at this one thing, this guy comes up and said to me and says, "There are too many canoe organizations," because there was AEW, ACA, USCA. There are too many organizations. You should have one organization. If you don't do that, we're going to regulate you out of existence. And I just was sort of taken aback and finally said, "Gee, I hope you don't mean that, because if you do, there's going to be an awful fight." But, there was that kind of arrogance. And to give you an idea of what happened, the guy who was running the Office of Boating Safety was a rear admiral. After Reagan got through, the guy who was running it was a lieutenant commander. And they're still doing a lot of useful functions. They're just not doing things like, there were three guys in blue coats and braid and white hats who showed up at the put-in of the Cheat Canyon to tell Ralph McCarty that they were the new sheriffs in town. Needless to say, Ralph talked their ear off, and they finally didn't know which way was up. But why would you do that? Well, that was the way government was working, and they had to step back a bit. And what we were trying to tell these folks was, we want education, not regulation. Brains and skill are what makes boating safe. And these pictures here are by Dean Norman, who is from he was from Ohio. He worked for Hallmark as an artist, but he also did the Jacques and Pierre, the Voyagers cartoons for American Whitewater. And my favorite was a picture of Pierre eating some breakfast cereal, and Pierre pops up and says, "Do not eat all the oatmeal, Pierre. We still have to patch the canoe." Now, paddling matures in the 1980s. And of course, you see the bottom right, that's Ludwig Hearn. I'm not sure who the third person is.
Bobby Robinson, yeah.
Is that Bumbo?
For sure.
All right. And then this here is Don Banducci, who later started Yakima Products. That guy there is John Connolly, who ran Eastern River Expeditions. These two guys are from the Midwest. I'm not sure just which pair it was, but you can see they're running hard stuff. They're well geared. And the gear is starting to improve, especially the rotomolded boats. How many of you had a Holoform River Chaser? Oh yes, a few Holoform River Chaser owners. That was, the hull was really tough, but the outfitting was awful. And what one guy I know, Tom Daniels out in New Jersey, ordered a tractor trailer load of hulls, and then he got somebody to mold seats, to cut foam pillars. He figured out all kinds of ways to anchor things, and of course we had Yakima foot braces and not that stupid bar they put in there. And people would come in, they'd pay their money, they'd get their hull, and this, and this. Those weren't bad boats, but a Perception Mirage, you could paddle right off the shelf. And of course the Dancer, which dominated the sport for a good 10 years, and Lee Belknap is still a proud Dancer user. There's one on his car outside. It was designed in 1982. And I thought this picture would interest you guys. This is the 1981 Stickeen River First Descent, with Rob Lesser led, with Lars Holbeck, John Wasson, Rick Fernald, and Don Banducci. And they are all wearing high float PFDs with the bottom, and people would fold the bottom up. That's what kayakers did back then. They won't put up with that nonsense then. But that was a jacket that I originally sold as a kit, and towards the end of the 1970s, the kit business died because women entered the workplace in huge numbers, and they weren't available to sew people's kits. I had one guy say, can I return my kit? I tried to give this to my wife, and she threatened to divorce me. So I work with Extra Sport to develop the high float, and we gave them to Rob and his group, which appeared on American Sportsman. And in 1980, something very significant happened. The first river rescue classes. I mean, before, when something happened, we kind of scratch our head and figure it out. But in 1980, Slim, Ray, and Les Bechtel started the first class, and Slim, want to take it away?
All right. Actually, there were a couple of other classes that were developed about the same time, which we didn't even know about. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources was doing one, which was primarily focused towards low-head dams, because they had had a couple of years up there that they had lost more firefighters in swiftwater incidents, primarily with low-head dam incidents, than they had actually fighting fires. So they said, well, we got a problem, which was good. And then you had this other bunch out in California we sort of vaguely heard of. Jim Segerstrom and a couple of guys that he knew out there, and they were doing Rescue 3, which is, Jim unfortunately has passed on, but Rescue 3 is still going strong, and they're one of the main providers of rescue agencies out there. In fact, they're probably the biggest one when it comes to dealing with agencies. So Les and I started out, and there was a little skepticism about it initially, but they let us do it, and it actually picked up pretty well. Particularly a lot of club members would come in and take it, and it had become a regular thing after that. You can see most of the people here are NOC guides, and it got to be where it was more or less required that you should take it. And there really wasn't any sort of certification at the time at all. Nobody had any sort of certification on that. So we had to just come up with our own curriculum, which was good in a way because we could do what needed to be done, but it was bad because nobody recognized it. Now, later on, we teamed up with Rescue 3. They had a recognizable curriculum. They had done all the stuff that they needed to do to get that approved, and that's probably the premier certification now. I don't think NOC ever came up with any certification. Is that right, John?
I think that's correct.
No formal certification.
Well, there wasn't much formal certification for anything. You took a kayak class, you took a rescue class, and NOC was offering it. That was all the certification you needed.
Right. But the good part of that, like I say, is we could develop our own curriculum. It's what we needed to do, and not necessarily what was right for, say, somebody up in Ohio doing low-head dam rescues and that sort of thing. And you had actually a few others that came on board just about the same time. Dillon and Virgin Chambers up in Pennsylvania, and a couple of others. And eventually we established contact with each other, exchanged information, and came up with sort of a standard class on that. But yeah, NOC was definitely one of the first.
As far as I'm concerned, they were the first, and
Yeah.
Les and Slim developed the course and taught a lot of those courses, and got the idea that, hey, if you're going to go paddling, you need to train for swiftwater rescue beforehand. You don't want to be faced with a desperate situation, as Slim and his group was on the Chattooga, and be trying to figure it out. And were issues with the fire companies in a lot of places because they just didn't have any training, and they either show up for water rescue in civilian clothes or in fire turnout gear. And I ended up, the first time I spoke to rescue squads was the Carbon County Rescue Squad in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania on the Lehigh. They'd been showing up during water releases and throwing ropes at people and just generally making a nuisance out of themselves. And I walk into the room, and there are about 30 people sitting there, like this. They weren't too happy to be there, and I think a lot of the reason was the only paddlers they met were the ones that they were pulling out of stupid situations. And fortunately, I had one of Jim Segerstrom's video of rescue bloopers, which were mistakes, often fatal, made by rescue squads while the TV cameras were rolling. And I said, I'm sure you guys know all about this, but let's go look through this. Like right here, you see these guys rescuing this car? Well, they're approaching it from the downstream side. And watch what happens when the people move to the downstream side. And the car just picks up and rolls. And I said, ooh, I bet you guys know not to do that. Now let's take a look at this. And after I finished that, everybody was sort of whispering to each other. And really, that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't going to convince them that they were wrong, but hopefully I'd start to open their eyes a little bit. Now, there was Slim mentioned the multiple fatality in Ohio, and the head of the Ohio DNR was Norval Hall. Norv was a botanist, and it's like, well, what's a botanist doing as the head of the Office of Boating Safety? Well, Norv, being a scientist, faced with a situation he didn't understand, brought together everybody he could and tried to figure out some solutions. And they were well on the way when I ended up working with them a bit. They had some excellent people in Ohio, and a similar program was also being developed in Pennsylvania. With Virgil Chambers, who is, Pam Dillon is from Ohio, and Virgil are in the picture. They are a married couple living near Ohio Pile these days, both retired. But, Virgil actually said, if we're going to do boating safety for non-powered paddlers, we should aim our stuff directly at them and not expect them to read powerboat stuff. In fact, we might want to aim fisherman-oriented things at fishermen, and different stuff for recreationists, and that was pretty radical. And at first he caught a lot of grief from the commission, but he eventually got things moving, and they both developed strong swiftwater rescue programs within the state, which started training rescue squads. And of course, organizations like Rescue 3 were there for people who wanted more. And what I did about this time was in Richmond, Virginia, and in Washington, D.C., paddlers were bumping up against some issues with first responders and with river managers. So we ran river safety symposia where we brought paddlers, people from government like Virgil and Pam, who came to these things with a number of their other key people like Bill Steiger and Emily King, and then we invited fire companies. We were sponsored by the Red Cross and usually somebody in government, and got a lot of firefighters there. Now, of course, the ones we really wanted to reach in Richmond was the Richmond Euro Fire, and officially they didn't show up. Unofficially, there were 2 firefighters there who would not say who they were with, but they were with Richmond Fire. And after that clinic, I learned about a month later they hired Rescue 3 to come and train all of their groups that responded to water accidents. And I'm going, yes, this is what we want. We want to show them something, and if it's worth something to them, they can do it. And of course, we had them talk about things like incident command, evacuation, things that fire companies are much better at than paddlers. And 1979 was when I started making rescue bags. What happened was I was in the ACA instruction committee, and at the time we were working with the Red Cross to develop a better canoe and kayak program for both flatwater and whitewater. And back then, Red Cross did a lot of training, and they did for many years until they just made a corporate decision to get out of the business, which is one of the reasons that ACA is now in the business. But back then, most of the people were Red Cross. We were working with a guy named Ray Miller, who had done a lot of their instructional work, you know, videos, books. He was a sailor and had done all kinds of boating. And he sent me a drawing that looked a lot like that. And, you know, back then, a safety nut was someone who carried a length of rope in their boat, but it was usually all coiled up, so it would take a while to deploy. And I, being a yacht guide, I mean, we don't use ropes much. If somebody got in trouble, they pinned a boat. If you were getting a rope out, your other guides would laugh at you as they jumped in the water and swam out to deal with it. But so I got a stuff sack and a piece of foam and some rope and put it together, and I went out onto my front steps. Holy smokes! I realized that this was something pretty special, and started making it. And of course, I couldn't patent it because he had gotten this from the U.S. Navy. It was apparently standard equipment on many naval lifeboats, and I'm sure goes way back in naval history. And of course, the throw bag continues to develop, and you continue to get more refined designs. And as Sam said, a number of books on swiftwater rescue, and of course, Kent Ford's whitewater self-defense video. I loved working with Kent, but Kent was a little crazy. I mean, we talk about setting something up, and the next thing you know, Kent is climbing on the upstream side of a strainer pretending to drown. He was pretty hardcore. Did things that I wouldn't necessarily do. And now we have the 90s. You can see the new school phenomenon. Big influx of new people, big influx of new designs. I remember when Joe Pulliam was at Dagger and he was about to start building kayaks, and he had built I think the Response was the first one, and then the Crossfire, and I took a delivery of Crossfires, and Joe said, we're going to start making a lot more boats. And they started bringing designs out willy-nilly. And of course, at this time, you had Core and Addison, you had Wave Sport. So there were a lot of new designs, a lot of people trying new stuff. And, you know, these guys were really pushing the limits, but they thought they were pretty hot. I remember I was sitting in an eddy one time, and this kid comes up next to me and looks at me and starts telling me about why my old gear and an old boat wasn't cool. And I just sort of said something, shut up, kid. I was boating the Gully before your parents knew each other. But then it sort of calmed down after a while. And I had a really great experience. I was at this rapid on the lower Gully called Chicken Ender. It does crummy enders for short boats, but it puts long boats up there. And there are a bunch of these new school guys back there sort of screwing around with it. And I went, hit it. Ooh, I got some good air. Rolled up in the eddy. And this kid looks at me and says, wow, man, pigs in space. The sport really grew fast during that period. Although I think some of the growth was because there were so many designs out that people were trading in boats faster. Like, you know, I closed my shop in 1995, and if you came in and wanted a kayak, it's, oh, what color would you like your dancer? Or maybe, would you like the big dancer or the small dancer or the medium dancer? But now there was a whole lot of choice, and a whole lot of the sales, I think, were people upgrading and upgrading and upgrading. And of course, freestyle kayaking started. I mean, these people, I got my enders, but the enders are very tame compared to what these people are doing. I mean, I don't know how they keep their equilibrium. And whitewater manufacturing really grew, and some of the advertising had an edge, particularly Corin Addison's ads. But you know, I didn't really care for it. But you know, that's their business, not mine. And kayak outfitting became a whole lot safer. Bigger cockpit opening. Why didn't we do that before? People were convinced if you got a bigger cockpit, you couldn't keep the opening dry. Well, they improved spray skirts, and you had bigger cockpits, different volumes for different sizes, shock absorbing bulkhead foot braces instead of foot pads, better back bands, stronger grab loops, and an overall much stronger construction. And of course, the boats are shorter, so they're much harder to pin. But better gear makes it possible to run harder rivers. And because of the sport, partly because of the money, there was now money to actually have pro paddlers. It attracted some amazingly talented athletes. And uncommon skills became more common. The summer '73, that's my friend Martin Begun running Potter's Falls, and there was a thing in there saying, well, Potter's Falls is completely unique. It's, you know, most ledges aren't going to be safe like Potter's Falls. And you see there's not a lot of water going over it. Then less than 10 years later, waterfalls, forbidden fruit, or calculated risk. How dangerous are they really? That was an article written by Wick Walker. And then finally, in the mid-'80s, the nation's top runnable waterfalls. Put them in your bucket list and check them off. And running waterfalls people clearly know how to do it, and they know how to do it safely. I mean, people talk about, well, that's an easy 50-footer. Well, I don't run waterfalls, but I respect the people who do. And rescue vests were produced in the U.S., and Slim Ray was one of the key people in getting them produced. Slim?
Well, let me back up just a little bit and talk about two of the other safety innovations that you've already mentioned.
You guys in the back seats here, Slim?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
One is the T-shaped cockpit that has the deep opening in the front. And we got that from the people in Europe. Now, I was lucky enough to get over to Europe and get to know some of the paddlers over there, some of the boat designers like Tony Prion, and be a card-carrying member of the Alpine Kayak Club, which was probably at the time the premier paddling and safety organization over there. And so we really got that from the Europeans. Took a little doing to get it accepted over here by people like, you know, Perception, and once it finally is, everybody's doing it now, and they should. The other thing is river knives, and we went through, I think John could testify on that, we went through a whole thing. Les and I started carrying knives on our life jacket, and everybody, what's that for, man? Spread your peanut butter. So we got a lot of grief on it, but eventually, you know, they accepted the fact that, yeah, it's a good idea to have a blade on it so you can cut particularly loaded rope if you need to. So now it's another accepted part. Tell you a quick story about the rescue harness. We also got that from the Europeans, which it was developed because they do a lot of, when they say alpine kayaking over there and running waterfalls, yeah, they do it all the time. I mean, the Alps are steep, and these guys run some pretty gnarly stuff over there. So this was sort of developed from the alpine climbing harness to get somebody out if they were pinned or trapped, or sometimes you're just down there in this little sheer gorge, which is about as wide as this room, and it's just straight up for like 100, 150 feet, and that's the only way you're going to get somebody out of it. So, and this was actually developed by a guy named Horst Forsadel, who's still active over there. And I got to know him and bought some of the life jackets that had that over there. In fact, I donated some here to the Whitewater Museum, which sort of shows the evolution of the rescue harness to what we know today, which didn't just get interviewed or invented overnight. So the problem was we had this thing and it worked, but it was also illegal. Yeah, minor problem.
Unapproved.
Well, same thing. Try to take one on someplace like the Grand Canyon, you know, they will wrap your knuckles in a heartbeat. So we wanted to get this approved, and people were okay with it, but we soon found out that it was a very, very lengthy process. And it had to go through UL, Underwriters Laboratory. They're the ones that really write the standards on this. So these guys were, again, like Charlie's talking about, they had absolutely no knowledge of how whitewater, swiftwater, all that works and what we need. So they were bringing up all this stuff about quirkeries for yacht vests and things like that. No. That's just not going to work. So in 1990, we had this big international rescue symposium, international safety symposium. We had people we got some grant money, and we had people from all over the world, from Europe, from Japan, from down under, from Russia, and we all came together and talked about river safety, which is a very, very productive conference. And then we got everybody together on some of the tables right outside the conference hall at NOC, and we sat down and wrote a standard for the chest harness. Just everybody had their input on it, and it actually worked pretty well. A great example of international cooperation. And so we put it down, just put ISS on it, and then went over to UL and said, here's your standard. Here's what we need. And it's amazing the power of the printed word. When you have something in writing, and it looks like it was done by an international organization, which didn't really exist. But it looked impressive. And so they went, well, okay. So they were, they argued about it and changed this and changed that, but they basically adopted the same standard and they stuck it into Class 5. And one of the first people to put on a life jacket through Extra Sport was Charlie Walbridge. And there it is, the Type 5 high float with a rescue harness. And by God, it worked. And so now you see it on a lot of different jackets, big ones, small ones, racing jackets, rescue jackets, and it's an accepted part of a whitewater curriculum. But that's how we got it in there.
And it was thanks to Slim with the foresight to get all these people together at the symposium. And some of them gave him grief. They said, oh, you stupid Americans, what are you doing? You don't understand anything. Well, I'm glad he did it. And 1995 was when the HCA rescue course started. Now, I had been teaching for several years something I called whitewater self-defense, which was swimming, wading, and throw bag use. And because I had started swimming around in the Delaware when the water was too low to be interesting to boat, and I said, I feel much better about being on the water and I feel more confident. And people tended to feel that after they did this. And eventually Wayne Sunmacher and his wife took the course, and he asked to teach with me a bit. And I had been asked by Merle Jarvis, who was the ACA Commodore, to put together a swiftwater rescue program, and I didn't want to do it because I was really good at the in-water stuff because of my guiding background on the Cheat and Yak. but I was not good at ropes. Wayne was pretty good at ropes. He had worked with rescue squads, and he had also had jobs where he did things like inspecting communications towers. So he knew ropes. And together we started to put a course together, and we ran different versions of it and kept trying to see what worked and what didn't. And I remember one time Wayne says, we need to have a 5-day course, soup to nuts, everything. And I said, Wayne, no one's going to come for a 5-day course. We get them 2 days max. And also, swimming was controversial. I remember I was swimming some people in the Delaware, and this guy comes up to me and starts yelling at me that I was going to kill somebody. And it's like, Tom, it's me. But he came from an era where people really were, when you were swimming, that was really scary. And I heard a story that one time he's swimming on the Tohickon and Racecourse Rapids, and he goes over to his buddy Ray Curran and grabs his boat to get some help. And Ray starts beating him over the head with a paddle and yelling, "Go, you simple bastard! You kill us both!" Well, when people have had experience swimming, it makes them a lot better able to take care of themselves in the water, and it also makes them better able to handle emergencies, because getting out someplace like we used to do as guides isn't scary. It's just something that you do. And this is sort of an outline of the ACA course. Boat unpinning, entrapment rescue, and rescue organization. I would say that the NOC course that Slim Ray taught was the first time the Z-drag was used and the first time the stabilization line was used. So we were starting to bring things together. Thank you. Really works. Now we're at the 21st century, where paddlers are doing amazing things. But there are also some other changes. Growth of artificial whitewater courses. There are a lot of them now, because the dirty little secret is a lot of these artificial courses are not for paddlers. They're a draw for people to come around and sit and watch people paddle and spend money at the restaurants and stores around. But of course we benefit, and that's the important thing. Guided rafting has changed. When I guided, your typical guest was a guy in his 20s or early 30s. There were very few women. Almost no kids. If there was a kid, it was probably a 15, 16-year-old, somebody pretty mature. But now, all ages, both sexes, kids, and of course, it's not, people aren't as hardcore. They want adventure as long as it's, not too adventurous. And so it's a family activity now, and that has changed the way companies run trips. We used to do stuff with guests that would get you fired now so fast. The unofficial motto of the local fictional local guides association was, "The customers are here for our entertainment," and they were. It was fun. I loved it, but you can't do that stuff today. The people won't put up with it. And of course, you have cell phones. Two things that happen. One is people calling for help with their cell phones. Sometimes when they're pinned up to their waist in a strainer, they didn't bring a life jacket, but they got their cell phone in a waterproof case. And a number of rescues have been made because you could get that kind of communication. The other thing is less helpful. People driving along see something on the river that looks scary to them, and they call 911. There was an instance where a couple of guys were sunning themselves out in the middle of the Potomac below the Shenandoah, and somebody calls in, "Guys stranded in the river." Well, when the dust settled on that, they had closed Route 340, which is a major route, in both directions, and landed a helicopter on the bridge. And at this point, the guys had gotten back in their boat and were paddling down, and they're wondering what all the commotion is. They only figured out later what was going on. And I've talked to people who rent tubes and boats on the Shenandoah, and they say they sometimes get into these contests with the locals. They're going to help one of their guests, and the locals say, "Well, no, this is our scene, not your scene." And in Colorado, there was an instance where some guests got washed downstream. The guides get in a car and go chase downstream to pick her up, and somebody had called in an emergency, and so the rescue squad responds, and they're local people in civilian clothes. They go in and they're telling these guides to stop, and the guides, of course, these are their guests, so you got to go do it. And there was pushing and shoving, and the guides ended up in handcuffs. And after that, there was some serious discussion between the guides and the sheriff's department, and it all got settled out. But this is the sort of thing that can happen with cell phones. Digital cameras have recorded some truly amazing rescues, and you know they're complete with people slipping around and cussing and you know, it's not textbook. It's real people working really hard. And it's because they got these cameras on all the time. And so whatever happens, happens. And you also start to have conflicts with park managers. I read Robert Kaufman's, he was a recreation prophet at one of the junior college in Maryland, Frostburg State. He was at Frostburg State. It's not a junior college, it's a full college, but he was teaching outdoor rec. And you read his book, and with a lot of it, it's like, if you're running a park and you see something dangerous, you either make it really hard to do or illegal or both. But now you've got biking and rock climbing and paddling, where there is definite risk, and it's taken a good bit of adjustment. And you get tensions, like right here, this is a rock that has killed, probably 5 people over 30 years, but one year it killed 3 people. And there was a coroner's inquest, and there were people who wanted the rock blown up. And of course, you know, the thing is, you blow that rock up, there's plenty of stuff downstream that's a little bit suspicious, and you don't want to be in the position of clearing the whole rapid, making it safe. And then if you do, what about the rest of the river? You're going to go down to River's End and take Snaggletooth out? You know, there's just no end to it. And it actually came up again this year because there was another death, and it was quite a circus because the plaintiff's lawyer, they're obviously going to sue the raft company, used it as a place to try out their arguments. And I went there, as I did before, at the request of the park, and just said, you don't want to be modifying the river. You know, I don't care who is doing it. They brought Scott Shipley in to testify. And I mean, if anybody could do it, it's Scott. But you don't want to get into that. It's an endless job. And but I did say that I thought that they needed to put a guide in every boat, and one of the outfitters is pretty mad because I said that. But it's time, I think. And falls running has been a challenge for park managers. The Great Falls sort of gradually happened. At first it was illegal, and then you could do it if it was after hours. And then people started running it during the day, and people like to see it. So now you can run it pretty much any time you want to. And fortunately, after they opened the falls up, and part of it was Maryland owns the river. The boundary is on the Virginia shore. And so when Virginia tried to regulate, Maryland said, oh, no, you don't. You can't say you can't run the falls. We own the river, and we say you can. Don't you love government? It's wonderful. And but Ohiopyle, that was a real challenge. I remember I was in the room when Larry Adams, who was the first superintendent, was being introduced, and everybody said, they said, we're not going to let people run the falls. And it's like, yeah, no brainer. Well, that was 1974 or 5. Times change, but it took a long time, and there were all kinds of oddities about it, and it had to go through multiple levels of state bureaucracy. The one thing that really happened was we were trying to get permission to run the falls race to demonstrate that it could be run safely, and Doug Hayne, who I'd worked with on the Tohican and liked very much, was dead set against it. And so the guys who were really the pushers in this, went over his head. They knew somebody high up in the Bureau of State Parks and got permission from them to run it. And of course, Doug was not too happy about all that. And I was at the race, you know, standing around sort of providing half-assed safety, because you really can't provide safety for the falls. You know, you can sit at the bottom and wait for what comes out, but there are things that could happen. But I just sat there and talked to him and sympathized with him, but said, yep, you know, we're going to do this. It's not for me. I don't run waterfalls, but this is perfectly mainstream. And we went to Harrisburg. We talked to the deputy director, and you know, there was a lot to it. It took 12 years. Kevin remembers all of that, and there were some accidents. This is a death on Great Falls of the Potomac River. Very attractive young woman, very good paddler, but she flipped and swam in a very bad place. And the reason you'd want to talk about an accident like this, remind people what they're dealing with, because you run the falls and run the falls. It's clean, it's easy until it isn't. And we just want to remind people what they're dealing with. This is the Chiola River Python Rapid. 2 paddlers died within 2 years of each other. Maria Noakes and Chris Clark, excellent boaters. What happened? Well, I'm not sure, but I can make a guess. They run Bear Creek Falls upstream. Whoo! Man, we just ran Bear Creek Falls. There's an island. Left side it has nothing there. Right side, and even looking at the right side, you don't realize it's nasty, and nobody really knows what happened, because the way they found somebody had been killed is a boat floated out and they started looking for the person. So this is a reminder to people, hey, we've had problems here. If you're going to be here, you need to take this rapid seriously. And then this was wonderful. The Midnight Miracle. The best rescue I have seen in my entire career reporting accidents and near misses. A woman saw a kayak floating around. She picks it up, she takes a picture of it, she puts it out on social media. And the people on social media say, hey, that's so-and-so's kayak. Well, it turned out so-and-so had been running the river by himself, and when he ran, because there was a lot more water, he got pushed into the corner there. He was there for hours, and this is in fall. It wasn't super cold, but it wasn't nice either, and he was stuck there. So rescue squads come out, and they can't find him. But a group of excellent paddlers from the area took a look at it, and online, and they said, "I know where he is. We're going to go get him," and they did. And they pulled him out at midnight. It's an amazing story, and you can read about it in the AW Accident Database. Amazing story. And something that wouldn't have happened without social media. Now, American Whitewater's Accident Database has over 2,250 individual entries of accidents and near misses which date back over 45 years. It's not complete. I mean, we're not the government. We can't force people to send us accident reports. And even the government doesn't get them all. I talked to the boating law administrator for the state of Idaho, and he said sheriffs in certain counties don't send him stuff because they're the constitutional sheriffs and it's none of the state's business. But you get this information, you can start to look for trends. One of the things that I found is that these spikes in accidents correlate really well with high water periods. And like I said, 45-year snapshot. Which types of deaths are most common? Which states have the most accidents? What's the most common water level? Accidents by cause, by boat type, class, month. Now this is kind of interesting because AW did a study back around the year just before the year 2000, where they got into Coast Guard's data, and getting into government data is a real nuisance. I don't try to do it. There are a few rangers who will send me stuff on the sly, but trying to get stuff from the government, you know, filing Freedom of Information Acts or just trying to get people to work with you, they are very, very uncooperative. They've got all kinds of reasons why not to work with you, and then when they do it, they charge you. So, but what she did was she compared what we had and what they had, and you can see that Coast Guard gets a lot more, and of course a lot of it is flat water accidents, which I don't track. And AW alone gets some that Coast Guard doesn't. And I mean, one of them was Chuck Kern's death, which occurred in a national park. Why didn't that get in? I don't know, but that happens. It's really hard to track every single incident. And you know, you also see that, and this is back then, that flat water accidents are common, and ocean are just starting to happen. My guess is that flat water and ocean will be going up, because used to be when you saw somebody coming in the other direction with a boat on the roof, they were a whitewater paddler. And I can remember driving down 81 when there was still a median in the boat and there was somebody coming in the other direction. We both drove on the median and chatted. But you know, now it's likely to be a wreck boat. And a lot of these folks, they're not looking for adventure. They're not looking for whitewater. They just want a nice day on the river. But they get on a river with a little current, takes them the outside of a curve, shoves them under a tree, takes them over a low-head dam, and all of a sudden they're in whitewater whether they want it or not. And I think a real challenge for us is to figure out how to help them. Now, paddlers take care of their own. We get swimmers to shore. We get gear together. And a surprising number of rescue squad calls are for people stranded or for people on the wrong side of the river. We tend to handle our own stuff sometimes. These two gentlemen pinned a boat in Martin Rapid on the Mackenzie River in Oregon, and you can see it's not a particularly difficult rapid. If they had wanted to and had a boat downstream, they could have jumped in the river and floated down, but they didn't. They called for help, and the power boat couldn't reach them, so they had to use a helicopter.
Oh, gosh.
One boat trips are a real issue, and that's one of the things that I've been talking about a good bit lately, because you know, you got 2, 3, 4 people in a boat. I'm not solo paddling. Well, if the boat flips or gets stuck, you're solo, whether you believe it or not. Now, swiftwater rescue has long been the redheaded stepchild of the system, because a unit could go for years without a major water incident, and then all of a sudden you get a big flood, and they're doing water rescues nonstop for a couple of weeks, and then they're back. What I used to do was I would note where the floods were, and about 3 months later I'd be sending mailings out about throw bags, because they'd step back and ask for money. They have money, and that's when they're ready to go.
Altruism has its
Swiftwater rescue is skills intensive, not gear intensive like fighting fires is. And one of the issues that we've had is sometimes they think that something like an airboat is going to be good for everything. Well, the airboat does not do very well in hydraulics, and unfortunately, with this particular incident, 3 people ended in the river, and one of them died. So that it's not gear. Again, brains and skill. And the key thing, of course, with dams is keeping your rescuers out of the backwash. First responder kills is constantly improving. You know, Pam Dillon and Virgil and I, you know, we were saying, you know, when we watch TV and we see these guys showing up with life jackets and helmets and doing smart things, we just smile. Because it's something that all of us, you know, Pam, Virgil, me, Slim, and many others worked very hard to get to. They're not experts. I mean, a guy who takes Swiftwater 1 and Swiftwater 2, which is like you know, probably about a week's worth of courses, and then and then is with a squad that trains a few times a year. That's like a kayaker who does a week of rivers and then goes boating 2 or 3 times a year. But they do have a lot of enough expertise to stay out of trouble and to perform straightforward rescues. And some of these guys are pretty amazing. I mean, look at that top guy. That's the Anchorage Fire Department. There's a kayaker stuck under a log, and they've got a raft there, and they're cutting the thing with a chainsaw. I mean,
wow,
that's Alaskan. And Sandy Springs is it's on the Potomac. A number of the Potomac rescue squads spend a good bit of time on the water. They've got good boat handling skills. They're very capable. What sort of things do they do? Well, flood rescue. And the sneaky thing about flood rescue is you look at flood waters and you say, oh, that's flat water. It's not. It's moving. And if you don't pay attention, it will move you someplace you don't want to be. And stranded persons, we've talked about that. Search for missing people. Vehicle in the water. Those are the most common things. Sometimes paddlers can help. We're particularly good at searches, although they're using drones a lot now. And drones are very effective, but some paddlers found a body that was just out of range of the 2 spots where the West Virginia DNR were running their drones. And fortunately, the guy who was running the drones was a boater, and he suggested getting some locals to run the river and see what they could find. Helicopters are useful, but expensive tools, and they're evacuation tools, not rescue tools. It's very rare that you actually rescue somebody, although that guy who's being picked up, he was probably stranded on that island for a while. I remember after the 1985 flood on the Cheat, there were a bunch of people who spent a night in trees, and the helicopters eventually picked them up. And the post-pandemic whitewater sport is amazingly diverse. All kinds of different crafts. I mean, you know, stand-up paddle boards, you know, even inflatable toys. And some of the people who have them know what they're doing, and some of them, not so much. And remember, there are 2 things to remember. One is that whitewater is perfectly safe, except when it's not. You can get away with the most amazing mistakes, or you can get killed with something silly. And the other is a corollary to this is what William Neely said. It's better to be lucky than good. And this spring, I'm hoping to get this book out. I'm behind schedule with it because I've had some other things going on. But these are from the AW database rescues. And what I realized when I was just going through them and reading them was, this is really uplifting stuff. It's not like fatalities, which can be some sort of a downer. This is really cool. This really shows off paddler ingenuity, courage, and you know, dealing with very difficult situations. So,
coming soon.
That concludes the presentation.
Just 2 very quick comments on here. You're talking about helicopters. Some of the helicopter agencies are very good, particularly the ones out in California.
Oh yeah.
And they can actually run down somebody who's in a flood channel who's moving about, you know, 20, 22 miles an hour or something like that.
Did they actually pluck someone out of those?
They can actually run this guy down. They have their zones, you know, rescue zones, so they'll run into a bridge and stuff like that, and dip the rescuer down and pull the guy out.
Wow.
That's cool.
That's a regular thing, and they're very good at it. The other thing I just wanted to say was that thank you, especially during the 80s when we were developing all this stuff, for putting out the safety newsletter. And we used to wait down at the NOC store for the new ones to come in, and we'd all get together over a beer, myself, Les, Dennis Kerrigan, some of the other people, and we would go through and, well, how did this happen? How could it have been prevent it? Was it an equipment issue? Was it a skills issue? What? And how could this person have been rescued? So that really gave a lot of feedback on that.
Taking it to the next level,
yeah.
Which is what you did.
So guys, these two are going to stick around for a little bit anyway. Charlie, you're going home tomorrow, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to say thanks to these two guys. What
oh my God.
Really?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say one thing. I spent 10 years as the chair of the ACA Safety and Rescue Committee. And every month we had a conference call, every month. And we would look at the most recent fatalities and we would look at the causation. And maybe should we change the way we teach certain things? Should we add something? Should we delete something? So it's all a dynamic process. And it goes back to, the ACA program is designed on Charlie's program, in that every module, this is a modular program, throw ropes, line management, swimming, wading, on and on, is designed because of things that had happened to try to prevent, minimize, and solve the problem if we could prevent.
Well, Sam, Mike Fischesser, our hero here, who's one of the leaders in the climbing world of this business, has always been so inspiring to me because he has always led the effort in climbing to ask that question: what went wrong in this fatality or this near fatality, and what could we do to prevent it? Not hiding, not putting our heads in the sand, not pretending it didn't happen. Just getting the information out there. So as you said, we're delighted when people are learning and using stuff we've already done. So same thing, Charlie and Les and Slim and Sam, these guys are the ones who have, and Ken Kastorf, the guys who have caused the rest of the sport to be really out front. Guys at Wildwater done a lot of this stuff. So it's a universal trait of the really high quality leaders that these two guys inspired. I'm sure either of them would be happy to answer questions. I know a bunch of people are ready to go. It's 8 o'clock. We said we'd be done at 8 o'clock, and we're done. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate it.
We had this conversation.
Actually, 3 days ago, he came out with a but he interviewed the guy that was on the bail at waterfall. And amazing.